Hey all, just thought I'd be a bit of a nerd and show off my pedal board because why not? So this is basically, you can't see it very well, but it's all built into like a wedge-shaped sort of main box, and then this front panel folds up and closes over. So effectively what I'm running here is the fly rig acoustic, which actually everything does go through that. So that's the electrics and the acoustic. And strangely enough, the actual acoustic EQ does tend to work pretty well on some of my electric guitars. The compressor, boost, reverb and delay work pretty well as well, and it's obviously got a built-in tuner. So essentially, signal comes into the tube screamer, through to the fuzz, through to the SL drive, then into the Sans amp fly rig, and then I've got it set up so that it can go out to my amp. You'll see back here we've got bunch of cables into a patch bay, and red one goes out to the amp, first brown one comes back from the amp. The interesting thing here as well is that the actual my amp in standby mode actually still has the preamp and everything active, so it means essentially I can play silently using the amp and run it through. So when it comes back, it runs into the two notes, the Torpedo Cab M, and that's actually running, I think it's an AC30 IR type thing in it at the moment. I can't remember exactly, but it sounds pretty cool. I'm not totally sold on the dip switch situation with the SL drive, just because I'd like to be able to access it a bit easier so that I could try a few different things. It's a bit of a pain to open the thing up, switch things, drop it back, and then try and sort of really make a very definitive decision about which one I like, but that seems to work pretty well. I'm running all of these pretty low gain. The tube screamer's running essentially your Stevie Ray Vaughan sort of style of thing, so it's low gain and boosted slightly. And then the fuzz is actually completely down. This is like a $50 Schwarzkopfer fuzz, which I got secondhand from somewhere, and strangely enough it works. These two together, tube screamer pushing into the fuzz, give a really cool sort of lead drive sort of tone, which I kind of really like. Unfortunately, at the moment, I don't have it hooked up in anything, so I can't actually give any audio samples, but I can do that at a later state if anyone wants. So effectively, what happens when it all comes back is it goes into the two notes, and then it's bypassed. You'll see up here, I'm just running a little Behringer XR12. And one of the things that I've found with this is that because it's actually running effectively the XR18, it's got 16 channels in the actual app, and then you can virtual channel. So these two silver cables here, one of them is bypassing the two notes and just taking the signal straight through. So I tend to use that for my acoustic when I don't want the amp modeler. So essentially it goes through everything, goes through the Sans amp. And when I'm using the acoustic, I tend to just link these two, the out and in, together. So I'm not using the electric guitar amp, obviously. And then on the other side is the actual cab sim and amp modeler output, and it does have a delay out on that side. This one also has a DI out, so depending on how I'm using it, I can just take it to a gig, plop it down, and they can take a XLR straight out of the side of that. And effectively that bypasses all the rest of this. But so if I get that screen back up, and there is a reason that that's sideways, and I'll show you that in a second. Effectively, yeah, so basically the two channels come in. One, that's the bypassed, and then that one there is the cab sim. This black thing here is a bit messy at the moment, simply because it's coming from a little Bluetooth receiver for tunes, which we're playing before, but my phone seems to have stopped. The little white box under here is just an Ethernet dumb switch, so it's essentially just a bunch of ports that the XR12 comes out into that, and then that goes out to the PC. I was running a Raspberry Pi actually installed in the box, but for some reason that started power cycling, and so isn't working at the moment. But effectively, yeah, you can see essentially I've got this first, because I've got two acoustics, so the first acoustic signal, it comes in on the same plug, but then it's patched out to the second. You can see up here the two yellow channels, so they're the two acoustic channels. They're just basically taking the feed from the one input and then virtually splitting it over to the next channel. And that means that my two acoustics, I can EQ them separately if we're using that. Because they're obviously slightly different. One's a bit brighter than the other. The other one's a bit sort of warmer and chunkier. And then same deal for the electrics. That's the cab sim and amp modeler channel. And then all these blue ones along here are the different electric guitars. So I've got 4 different ones, nothing fantastic. Les Paul, Les Caster, which I built during COVID, which is basically a flat slab Les Paul Junior body routed for Telecaster pickups with a Music Man neck and a Bigsby tremolo. I quite like that guitar actually. It's got a couple of issues at the moment, but it actually has a really nice sound, which I really like. So yeah, essentially, and also I can go this last red channel up here, or the one just before the BGM sort of thing. That red channel there is my bass, which is just a Squier jazz bass. But again, I like the feel. I'm not much of a bass player, so it's really just for me mucking around. I have not played bass live yet at all, and I'm not sure if I ever will be. Not sure anyone will let me get on stage and actually play bass, but hopefully one day. So yeah, I mean, it looks a bit more cluttered in here at the moment as it is, but that's kind of just because of this setup here. I've kind of just chucked a bunch of leads and there's like the headphones out. The really cool thing that I like about this is that I can pick this pedal board up, and because I'm a sound tech, I often have sort of time between sound check and then the actual show, so I'll have a couple of hours at times, and I can take this along to that gig, and in that couple of hours I can sit down and either take an electric or my acoustic. Generally not the acoustic for this sort of thing, I'd just take the acoustic on its own, or the bass, and actually just do some practice and still have, just basically headphones, and still actually have a decent sort of cab sound for either the electrics or anything like that. Yeah, so some of you obviously might notice that this is sideways. That is like that for a reason, and I'll show you that in a second. So essentially this is a setup for, one thing that kind of annoys me at a lot of gigs is when people have sort of big tablets or something on their mic stand, and generally you don't notice that much, but there are times if you're wearing sort of a bright outfit, you kind of have this, especially because I've done a decent amount of gig photography, you'll often have this sort of black square getting right in the way of the view line. If you're down in the audience sort of section, you're trying to shoot up and get a really cool action pose, sometimes you'll actually have a really good shot, and yet there's this big tablet stuck right in the way because it's hanging off the mic stand. So the way I get around this is I've got actually 4 of these and a DVI splitter at the moment. Obviously I've only got one set up, but essentially these run a PDF for all my cheat sheets. Now if you'll bear with me, I'll just actually have to change this back to its flipped mode. So that should switch around to be the right size, and then effectively, so this is running with Foxit PDF viewer, and there is actually a cool way you can go up and actually just auto assign. It's running to this three switch foot switch, and the first one full screens it, and then as we go along with songs, I can just go there. If I accidentally hit it, I can go back. And essentially that's got a nice big screen. I think I picked up these screens for like $30 each or something Australian. I think I got a couple at Cash Converters, a couple elsewhere. I think one was actually just someone gave it away. And they're just on a cheap eBay sort of wedge stand. It is adjustable, so I can change the angle. And this is probably a bit closer than I'd have it. Generally, it'd be further back. Just sort of still next to the pedal board, but further back where I don't have to sort of look straight down to see it. But I can have one here, one on the other side, and it means that you're not sort of really staring down at a tablet right in front of you or anything. You can sort of glance at it. I generally try not to use cheat sheets much, because I don't like that, and obviously anyone who's used them realizes you realize pretty quickly that the more you use them, the more you rely on them. So that's not fantastic, but it is a good thing, especially if you've had to learn sort of tracks in a hurry. And for lyrics and everything, I try and just I tend to learn a verse, and sometimes you'll forget the first verse in the first line in a verse. And so these can be obviously really handy. So yeah, not sure. I think that's probably about it. The only other thing would be what the amp is. The amp's actually, the reason why I got the 2 notes to start off with is, firstly, I'm obviously not as young as I used to be, so lugging an amp around is not as fun as I would like it. I have got ideas to pull the actual amp unit out of the combo and mount it separately so that it has a speaker box and the amp. But yeah, haven't actually got the nerve to try and screw around with that, because the amp is an old Engel classic tube line, dual 10 combo, 50 watt, and I really like the thing. Obviously Engel don't make that anymore, and I've only ever seen one come up for sale, and that's the one that I bought. So on the one hand, I don't particularly want to pull it apart and potentially muck it up, but also I didn't really want to necessarily carry it around, because if it gets damaged, yeah, good luck finding another one of those. But yeah, so I got the 2 notes. I have been really, really happy with this. I haven't spent enough time mucking around with it, but given what it can do, especially, you can, with the XR12, yes, it's only got sort of 4 mic inputs, mic preamps, and then a bunch of lines, but generally the bands that I'm in are sort of, we're 3 or 4 vocalists, a couple of lead vocalists and a couple of backing vocalists. And apart from the drums, which yes is a compromise, keys, bass, you can kind of get everything else into this just direct as a line. You don't actually need the preamps. I have got a couple of tricks like external preamps for the drums, and we have sort of done like a submix a couple of times, sort of using an extra desk. Not ideal, obviously, but if you're doing sort of gigs, function gigs and everything like that, generally, you're not controlling the cymbals and stuff cymbal and snare and everything in a small room tend to throw a lot off the stage anyway, so you don't really have control over that. My main thing is sort of getting the kick drum and the floor tom through the subs and actually getting a bit of punch out of them, and also getting some reverb onto the toms and the snare, just sort of give them a bit of room. The overheads, I mean, ideally, this is obviously a compromise rig, but it does mean that I can take this whole thing. I've got in-ears sort of built in. I am running the headphone as 2 extra auxiliaries, so they're split, left and right are actually split into mono sends. So we've got auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, auxiliary 3, and auxiliary 4. At the moment, I'm just mucking around with them as a stereo feed to my headphones, because I'm just playing at home at the moment. Also, this one here is just the channel switcher for the amp, and that little round thing up there is just a little metal sort of tub thing that I had from somewhere, and it's just got a whole bunch of picks and everything in it. So yeah, anyway, that's just me being a bit nerdy, because it just sort of feels that quite a few people don't quite realize, just how much you can muck around and, do things. Obviously, there's a lot more you could do with this. I am still trying to figure out a way to there is an app, apparently, or a program, sorry, that you can split a keyboard. So this is just acting as a keyboard command for the PDF viewer. But there is a way that you can split those commands off so that I can control the cues in the XR12. So essentially, at the same time it's telling the PDF viewer to change, it'll actually tell the XR12 to mute one guitar and unmute another. Potentially, you can do that with the effects, the delays and reverbs and everything, and actually use the effects and stuff that are in here. I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. Granted, I haven't spent a lot of time trying to figure it out yet, because this sort of, for what I need, this thing's running really well as it is. So yeah, anyway, I just thought, some people might find that interesting. I'm pretty happy with this. I tend to sort of build things as a bit of a prototype, and muck around with them, and then after a while I'll either rebuild it as the proper thing. I have had numerous big sort of pedal boards and everything before, and they're a lot of fun, but generally I'm not much of a tap dancer. I prefer to sort of have something that I can just push one pedal and get a sound. The other thing that I should probably point out, which probably quite a lot of you know about anyway, these two are set as they are largely because if I'm completely clean, I can hit both of them with 1 foot, and they'll create that sort of lead tone-ish sort of thing that I like. Or I can also activate either of them, individually. The SL drive, it's also running fairly low gain. I think it's probably about what would it be, 9 o'clock, I think, something like that. Actually, at the moment it's even lower. And yeah, essentially they're just stacking into each other, and that's how I seem to get the sounds that I really like. The SL drive does seem to be picking up some noise from somewhere, so that's probably in one of these cables. You can't really see it, but I have actually run all the DC behind and then the signal in front. It's a bit sort of cluttered, it's quite squished in there, but it's not getting moved, which is my main sort of thing. The thing that I've found most likely to damage cables is plugging things in and unplugging them over and over again. So, yeah, anyway, hope someone sort of likes that and found it interesting. It's there's a lot of sort of ways that you can muck around with stuff and milk a lot of sounds and everything out of very little bit of gear. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, and yeah, keep playing, I guess. So this is another bit of the rig that I just thought quickly I might show everyone. This is an extension cab that I built years ago now, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. So essentially that would sit behind the pedal board, or in front of it from the audience perspective. And that basically is just an extension cab from the amp. So that's throwing the sound of the guitar sort of straight back at me. They're actually slanted. I don't know if you can see too well. The actual baffles are slanted, so which has pros and cons. On the one hand, they're not firing directly into my face. So guitar amps, as any audience member who's ever sort of had an amp pointing directly at them, you realise pretty quickly that they beam quite a lot, and they can get pretty spiky and take your head off. Obviously, when this is only sort of a couple of meters from me, that can actually get a bit gnarly. But they're not slanted enough so that I can't hear what's going on. They're just running two different. They're just 10-inch. So that's an Eminence Redcoat, and that's a Celestion 1030. They're just speakers that I picked up secondhand, and they seem to work pretty well. The idea with that is not necessarily to sound magnificent. It's more, firstly, it loads the amp down, or up or down, depending on how you think about it, a bit more so that I can drive it a bit harder without sending all of the signal out of the amp, which often is facing towards the audience. But also it means that it's closer to me, it's firing directly towards me, and it means that I can still actually hear the guitar amp. It's quite often, you sort of end up driving your guitar amp quite a bit. The angle definitely does sound quite cool when it's pushed, which, a lot of people find with valve amps. And so essentially this means that it's driving 4 speakers rather than only 2, and yet all 4 of them aren't firing out towards the audience. Although I have sometimes actually kind of set them up as a quasi stereo sort of pair on either side of a drum riser. And, that's just sort of when you're kind of being a bit of a guitar dick and just going, I just want to crank the thing and have some fun. So yeah, anyway, that's it's also got the the good old rock god foot stands. That these are like just Bunnings glow in the dark tape, which actually is better. I find better for if I've turned the lights off in here and I walk around, then I don't stub my foot on this big weighty thing. It is just built out of MDF, which is fine. It's all solid and it works really well. Main sort of thing with MDF, MDF can be really good for speaker boxes because it's very dense. It's quite easy to work with as well. It is heavy, so this thing is not light. It's not terrible. It's only a dual 10, but it is made. I tend to over-engineer things when I build them, so it's pretty solid. The only thing to remember if anyone's building anything out of MDF is that if it gets wet, if you haven't sealed it properly, like painted over everything, it will just swell up and it will get destroyed pretty easily from sitting in water or anything. So that's obviously at the moment I need to get some really good black paint and respray everything. I have intended to get sort of a acoustic foam or something cover, but with the handle, and it hasn't been a problem. I do also have in here, you can see that's just a little mic clip that's bolted to the baffle. Originally I did have two of them, and down here I've got two XLR outs. So my plan originally, and I will get back to it at some point when I've got a bit more money to spend on mics that can just live inside a cab. Essentially you could mic both of these speakers, and you could just use this this speaker cab. If I ever get around to pulling the amp out of the combo, then I can take just the amp and stick this in front of me, still mic up each one of those. One of the things that I have thought at times might become a problem with that is if I don't do a lot of the whole rock god sort of standing on the monitor, but if I did, then potentially that can drive the vibrations and knock sound in there. I don't think it's likely to be a huge sort of issue, just because this thing's pretty chunky, pretty weighty, and you have to kick it pretty hard to make it move. But yeah, anyway, that's just another bit of the rig. There is one specific thing that I kind of thought was interesting, is I've been doing this. So this is basically the EQ section, and as you'll see, the chicken heads are all sort of flat out. There's an interesting thing which I remember people sort of talking about, guitar gods sort of running everything at 10 type of thing on their amps and everything, and I kind of just assumed that was sort of for a long time just sort of assumed that was just people turning everything up, like the old Spinal Tap. This one goes to 11, just because as guitarists we're often kind of dicks, and we like to make noise, like to let everyone know that we're around. There is a different side to that, which I'm not sure how applicable this is, but it does have an audible difference. The EQ sections on a lot of these amps are not an active EQ. So at 12 o'clock, effectively they're running, it's like an LC circuit or an RC circuit sort of thing. So a resistor capacitor type thing, which is essentially allowing signal to bleed off to ground. So when you turn things down, it's actually just sending some of the signal, depending on your capacitor settings and the actual circuit, above. So the bass obviously is only controlling things below the cutoff frequency. I'm not an electronics sort of person, but I have a bit of an understanding about it. But the thing that actually happens is that when they're at 12 o'clock, you're effectively allowing some of your signal to be bled out to ground, because the actual circuit at this point, and this potentially is not even completely out of effect anyway, but that's kind of like your null point from my understanding anyway. So effectively when the bass is effectively what looks like turned up full, it's not really, it's not boosting anything. It's acting as an attenuator. So the further back it goes, the less sort of bass it's controlling. Now, I didn't dislike this amp when I had them all at 12 o'clock, and I do tend to use that a bit more. I do tend to do a bit more tone shaping on the pedals and stuff like that, and then use the amp more as room correction kind of thing. So if it's got a bit too much bass, I might drop a bit off. So in that sort of, in that use, it works pretty well like this. And there is a noticeable volume difference and a noticeable sort of, well, there's a noticeable difference, whether it's good or bad, that's very subjective. But yeah, I've just sort of found that, you know, the sounds that I've liked that worked pretty well for me. So it's something to think about. Obviously, a lot of people won't be doing it like that. But, you know, muck around with your amp and, you know, see what sounds you can get. Don't think that that the 12 o'clock sort of setting is the neutral point, because on these circuits, from my understanding, that's not the fact. Anyway, yeah, thanks everyone, and yeah, take care, have a good life, and keep playing.